Like what you see here? Then be sure to subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8, a channel devoted to the history of college football. New videos drop twice a week. Click the card in the upper right corner or the link in the description to subscribe now. And now, on with our feature presentation. Back in the 1980s, there were very few ways for a team to get national exposure and play in front of the entire country. This was before the days of ESPN having games and showing a game just about every single night. This was before the days of MLB TV, where you could watch a game wherever you are. Back in 1988, if you wanted to play in front of a national TV audience in the regular season, and your name was not the Atlanta Braves where you're playing on TBS all the time, one of the only ways to do it was to play on ABC's Monday Night Baseball. If you got to play on Monday Night Baseball, it was a big deal, as you got a chance to show yourself off in front of the entire country that you otherwise would not be afforded. And while Monday Night Baseball was a big deal for the teams playing on it, it was a big deal if you got snubbed, especially if you thought you were going to play on ABC, and then ABC pulled the plug at the last minute for no reason, denying your team a chance at more exposure and potentially more revenue. Well, in 1988, that's exactly what happened with the game between the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers, in what we would later find out would become a precursor to the NLCS. Because at the end of May, just about 35 years ago to this day, the two first-place teams were set to square off in front of a national television audience on ABC. And then, ABC changed its mind at literally the very last minute for some inexplicable and unfair reason. It's a bizarre story that we're going to take a deep dive into today, because this is the story behind one of the craziest broadcasting dramas involving ABC, Major League Baseball, and the New York Mets. Before I talk about what ABC wound up doing that caused everyone to be outraged, we need some context to understand what the original plan was, and what happened during this game that caused ABC to do the unthinkable and reverse course. It's May 30th, 1988, and we've got an absolutely critical series taking place at Chase Stadium between the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers. On paper, through the first 2 months of the season, this is looking like the most important and the biggest series of the year in the National League, especially after what happened just a week ago, when the teams met at Dodger Stadium and the Mets swept the Dodgers. In one corner, you had the New York Mets, who were the best team in the NL East and had compiled a record of 32-15. And in the other corner, you had the Los Angeles Dodgers, who were the best team in the NL West and had compiled a record of 27-18. You had two teams battling each other who were both playing at least .600 ball, and who had a combined record of 59-33, or a winning percentage of over 64%. And not only were both of these teams really good, but they were both playing some of their best baseball, with the Dodgers having won 5 of their last 6, and the Mets having won 9 of their last 13. Plus, this game in particular was set to feature an incredible pitching matchup, with Ron Darling, who had an ERA of just 2.21 through his first 10 starts for the Mets, going up against Tim Leary, who not only had an ERA of 2.45 for the Dodgers, but had pitched back-to-back complete game shutouts, with his last effort against the Phillies on May 25th being a one-hit affair. This was a big game, and it was going to get the national Monday Night Baseball treatment that it rightfully deserved. However, what's the one thing that neither the Mets nor the Dodgers could beat? What's the one unstoppable force that will win 100% of its matchups? Mother Nature. Because after 2.5 innings of the game, with the Mets and Dodgers still scoreless, the rain came in, delaying the game for the time being. Fortunately for ABC, they had a backup plan, as they always had 2 games airing on Monday Night Baseball, just in case there was a weather issue. While the main crew was working the Mets-Dodgers game, the backup crew was working a game in the American League between 2 first-place teams, as the other game airing was this game right here, which was a battle between the New York Yankees, who were in first place in the AL East, and the Oakland Athletics, who were in first place in the AL West. Not a bad game to have as a backup, if I do say so myself. Pure coincidence that the two first-place teams in the American League were playing a series at the same time as two first-place teams in the National League. So the plan for ABC was simple. Switch over to the A's-Yankees game while the tarp was on the field and while the game at Shea was delayed, and then flip back to the Mets game that was nationally advertised afterwards. And the good news here was that this wasn't expected to be a crazy long rain delay. This was just a brief, passing by shower that would clear up in a few minutes. The Mets were in contact with the weather service on everything, and they confirmed that this storm was out of nowhere, but was just a freak storm that was going to be super short, almost like one of those Floridian sun showers. As Al Harrison, the Mets senior vice president, said on what was going on during all of this, "I told ABC I didn't think the storm would last too long. I wasn't even thinking that they would consider switching our game." The rain hit at 9:01, and by 9:35, the tarp was off, and play was set to resume. Super brief rain delay, and the weather service was 100% right on the money with this one. However, you might be noticing that I'm not showing any highlights of that Mets-Dodgers game, and instead, I'm sticking with the Yankees-A's game. And that's because, well, despite the rain delay being just 34 minutes, ABC decided to stick with the Yankees-A's game and decided not to switch back to the Mets-Dodgers game. Despite the fact that they knew that this rain delay was going to be short, despite the fact that the game was still super close, despite the fact that this was a battle between two first-place teams in the National League, and despite the fact that this game was nationally advertised as the game that the country was going to watch, ABC decided to just stick with the game in Oakland. If you wanted to watch the Mets-Dodgers game that we promised we'd show, well, that's too bad, because we're not showing it. Tough luck. And if that wasn't bad enough, if you were in New York and wanted to watch the Yankees-A's game, even before any of this went down, you could have done it, as Sports Channel was showing that game. The idea was that you would have Mets-Dodgers on ABC and Yankees-A's on Sports Channel, so whether you were a Yankees fan or a Mets fan, you'd be able to watch your team play on Monday night. But now that ABC went with the Yankees-A's game following a mere 34-minute rain delay, this meant that you had Yankees-A's airing on two channels in the New York area, and Mets-Dodgers was now airing on none of them, meaning that even though you expected to watch your Mets play, the only way you could now follow the action was by listening on the radio, and by listening to WFAN. And to say that there was outrage over this decision would be putting it lightly, especially since the whole purpose behind the move, in the eyes of some, was to make sure that ABC would be off of baseball coverage by 11 o'clock so they could get to the local news. However, that didn't even work, because the Mets game ended at 11:35, while the Yankees-A's game was a thrilling but super long game that was won by the A's 3-2 in 14 innings, and was a game that didn't end until sometime around 12:30 in the morning, 1 hour after the Mets game ended. Said one ABC spokesman on the switch, "Once the viewers became involved with the Yankees-A's game, we thought it would be unfair to take them away from it. We did continue to provide updates of the Mets game." However, this explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense for a few reasons. Number one, you thought it would be unfair to take viewers away from bonus coverage of a game that they were never supposed to get? How is that unfair? But taking viewers away from the game that they thought they were getting all along is not. Number two, you want to talk about unfair? Most Yankees fans and Mets fans are unsurprisingly based in New York. Any Yankee fan could have watched their team play on Sports Channel that night. Meanwhile, because of your decision to make Mets-Dodgers the Monday Night Baseball game, giving you exclusive rights to televise it, the only way a Mets fan could have watched their team play was by tuning into ABC. And you take that option away from them and leave them completely in the dark? And number 3, you still want to talk about unfair? What's unfair is leaving everyone in the dark from an information standpoint, seeing as the game resumed at 9:35, and it took until 10:04, half an hour later, for Gary Bender, the play-by-play man for the Yankees-A's game, to even say anything about switching permanently to that game. This was a massive screw-up that understandably left Mets fans feeling outraged. And as if this situation couldn't get any more bizarre, ABC brought up another reason why they switched to the Yankees-A's game. That reason? It had to do with a little-known rule known as the 30-minute delay rule. What this rule stated was that if a game was delayed by more than 30 minutes, then ABC had the power to change the game to something else. In other words, if you've got 2 games going on with your main broadcast and your alternate broadcast, and the first game is in a rain delay, then the network switches to the second game. If that delay lasts more than 30 minutes, then the network is under no obligation whatsoever to switch back to the original broadcast. Makes sense. However, there are a few problems with that. Number 1, this is one of those things where common sense needs to come into play. I get why that policy is in place. If you've got a game that gets delayed by 2.5 or 3 hours due to rain, and you flip to another game, switching off of that game, especially when the viewers have been invested in it for a while, and when that game is drawing to an end, and people want to see its conclusion, to go back to the original game might tick off a lot of people. But for a 34-minute delay, where the Mets were in constant contact with the weather service and with ABC, and everyone knew that play would be resuming shortly, and that this was going to be extremely brief? Come on. That's not in the spirit of the rule at all. But number 2, yeah, that rule was completely made up. Turns out, no such rule exists. As one network executive said, I called people, I checked around, and I never heard of ABC ever having a clear-cut policy on rain delays. So not only did said policy not make sense in this situation, but said policy didn't even exist in the first place. ABC just decided to screw over the Mets for reasons, and they got hundreds upon hundreds of calls from angry viewers, wondering why the network made the switch, and why ABC just lied to their faces and prevented them from being able to watch their team play. Especially since instead of this being a day game on Memorial Day, the Mets moved the game to nighttime in the first place so that ABC could televise it. And yeah, that didn't work out. As Al Harrison said, when you make schedules far in advance and you're dealing with a network, you have to show flexibility. But you don't ever like to hurt the bread and butter fan, the person who follows the team and pays to come to the ballpark. And safe to say, ABC did just that here with their complete disregard for Mets fans, and for any baseball fan across the country who wanted and expected to watch this NLCS preview unfold. Whether you think ABC made the right call in flipping permanently to the Yankees-A's game instead of coming back to Mets-Dodgers after the half-hour rain delay is up to you. However, the way that ABC handled this, with their lack of communication in the moment, and then their atrocious handling of the situation afterwards, with their explanations that made no sense and were awfully hypocritical, were just appalling. To close, I'm going to steal a line used by Howard Blatt, a writer for the New York Daily News, in the aftermath of this incident. Because on this day in 1988, ABC stood for atrocious baseball coverage. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.